Hello, and welcome to Eastern Roman history. In AD 1018, Basil II, Emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, conquered the Bulgarian Empire. This removed the greatest threat the Romans had endured in the Balkans for the last 400 years. However, this accomplishment had not been easy. Basil opened hostilities with the Bulgarians in 991 and continuously fought the Bulgarians for the next 27 years, making it one of the longest wars in Byzantine history. The first 4 years of the war was spent fighting in the region of Macedonia, deep in Bulgar territory. During this time, Basil defeated Samuel, the supreme commander of Bulgar forces, at the Axios River and captured Skopje. To crown this triumph, Basil captured Tsar Roman, the eunuch Tsar of Bulgaria. His new prisoner was treated well and integrated into the Roman aristocracy, giving him titles and command of the theme of Abydos. Basil II continued to campaign against the Bulgars. Samuel was not beaten, and when Roman forces were redirected to the east in 995, Samuel raided Macedonia and Greece down to Attica and the Peloponnese. Nikephoros Ouranos, who had been placed in command during Basil's absence, brought the Bulgars to battle at the Spakaios River. Ouranos won a decisive victory over the Bulgars after he attacked the Bulgarian camp during the night. During this night attack, many Bulgars were killed while they slept. This victory forced Samuel to sue for peace, but the sudden death of Tsar Roman in 997 and the proclamation of Samuel as Tsar convinced him to continue fighting. Until 1004, we have information about what happened next. The war was very back and forth at this point. Our main source is replete with tales of defections, as well as gains and losses on both sides. The Romans coaxed Bulgar noblemen and high-ranking officers to defect to them by offering them titles, honours, and a stipend. Sometimes, these new Bulgar aristocrats were placed in positions of authority, such as a strategos of a theme in another part of the empire. During this period, the emperor attacked Serdica and Theodorikanos. Basil reassigned Ouranos to Antioch in 999 and replaced him with David Arianites. In 1001, Nikephoros Xiphias, a Roman strategos, conquered Preslav, Pliska, and the Danube Delta, regions that had been lost to the Bulgars after the Battle of Trajan's Gate in 986. Basil then captured Vidin after an 8-month siege in either 1002 or 1003. The chronology is not too clear. Tsar Samuel counterattacked by striking at Adrianople on the 15th of August 1003. The Romans made gradual gains but came up against fierce resistance from the Bulgars. Then, our knowledge of the Bulgar War for the years 1004 to July 1014 is summed up in one short sentence by John Skylitzes in his Synopsis of History, Chapter 16, Paragraph 35. The Emperor continued to invade Bulgaria every year without interruption, laying waste everything that came to hand. When the curtain rises after this missing decade, Skopje, Beroia, and lands up to Serdica have been retaken by the Bulgars. This sentence by Skylitzes has received much discussion. Some modern historians even suggest that this was a cover-up by Basil II for a peace that had lasted between the two powers for these 10 years. However, it is more likely that the war did continue for these 10 years, but lacked a decisive engagement. Skylitzes throws the reader into the thick of events during what seems to be an almost routine attack on the Bulgars by Basil II in 1014. If there was a peace, there is no explanation for why hostilities ceased and then resumed. The obvious answer is that the war continued unabated. Thus, by July 1014, the war between Romans and Bulgars had continued for a long time without a clear victor. Basil II led his army out of Constantinople to invade and raid the Bulgarian Empire through the pass of Kleidion. When Basil II set out on his expedition and came to the pass of Kleidion in the region of Macedonia, he was met by a great palisade constructed by the Bulgars to block his advance. Kekomenos says that Samuel commanded an army that was 14,000 men strong. This was part of Tsar Samuel's new strategy to defeat Basil. John Skylitzes described the lead-up to the battle. Samuel could do nothing in open country, nor could he oppose the emperor in formal battle. He was shattered on all fronts, and his own forces were declining, so he decided to close the way into Bulgaria with ditches and fences. He knew that the emperor was always in the habit of coming by way of what is called Kievar Longus and Kleidion. So he determined to block this pass, and thus prevent the emperor from entering. He constructed a very wide fortification, stationed an adequate guard there, and waited for the emperor, who duly arrived. The Emperor Basil attempted to force his way through the Bulgars' barricade, but the defenders resisted his assault. The Bulgars threw and shot missiles at the Romans as they attacked. The assault failed. Basil had decided to abandon his expedition until he was approached by Nicephorus Xiphias. John Skylitzes described what happened next. Nicephorus Xiphias, then strategos of Philippopolis, made an agreement with the emperor that he would stay there and make repeated attacks on the enemy's line, while Xiphias would, according to his own words, go and see if he could do anything profitable and likely to solve their problem. He led his men back the way they had come. Then, trekking around the very high mountain which lies to the south of Kleidion, and which is called Valazitsa, passing by goat paths and through trackless wastes, on the 29th of July, 12th year of the indiction, he suddenly appeared above the Bulgars and came down on their backs with great cries and thundering tread. Completely taken aback by the unexpected nature of this attack, the Bulgars turned and fled. The emperor dismantled the abandoned defense work and gave chase. Many fell, and even more were taken prisoner. Samuel was only just able to escape from danger by the cooperation of his own son, who stoutly resisted those who attacked, got his father onto a horse, and led him to the fortress of Prilipon. Thus, Samuel's plan to bar Basil II from entering Bulgaria had failed, and his army defeated. After the battle, sometime between July and the death of Samuel on the 6th of October of that year, the following event happened, which is described by Skylitzes. They say that the emperor blinded the prisoners, about 15,000 in number, with orders that one man for each 100 be left with one eye, so he could be their guide, then sent them back to Samuel. He, when he saw them arriving in such numbers, and in the state they were in, lacked the moral fortitude to endure the shock. Fainting and darkness came upon him, and he fell to the ground. By applying water and perfumes to get him breathing again, his attendants succeeded in bringing him back to himself somewhat. As he revived, he called for cold water to drink. He got it, drank it, then suffered a heart attack. 2 days later, he died on the 6th of October. The blinding of the 15,000 is a much discussed subject. Even Skylitzes prefaces the information with "they say," implying that the event was legendary by the 1090s as much it is for us today. However, such an act was not necessarily exceptional. In 1015, Basil blinded all of the prisoners taken after he raided the area around Lake Ostrovos, Soskos, and the plain of Pelagonia. Kleidion was not the only victory the Romans won that year. Earlier in July 1014, not long before Basil's victory, the Romans won another victory over the Bulgars, as John Skylitzes reported. Before this happened, when Theophylact Botaniates had been sent to command Thessalonica after David Arianites, David Nestoritzes, one of the great Bulgar magnates, was sent against that city with a powerful force by Samuel. Theophylact and Michael, his son, offered resistance to them, and when battle was joined, repelled them in no small way, taking much booty and many prisoners, which he sent the emperor, who was then engaged before the defence work in the pass of Kleidion. The Battle of Thessalonica in July 1014 is also written about in the history of Michael Retaliates. Although his coverage of the father and grandfather of his patron, Emperor Nicephorus III Botaniates, was the subject of imperial propaganda, Retaliates reveals details about the battle that cannot be found elsewhere. It seems that the defending Roman forces were heavily outnumbered by the Bulgars, but a swift cavalry charge against the unsuspecting Bulgar forces was able to rout the enemy before the siege of the city could even begin. Many prisoners were taken and sent on to Basil. The combination of prisoners from both the Battle of Thessalonica and Kleidion Pass might explain the exceptionally high number of prisoners blinded. Even if it was not exactly 15,000, it was still very high. After Kleidion, Basil had gained some momentum over the Bulgars, but rather than go for the throat, he seems to have carried out his planned campaign. He sent the hero Theophylact Botaniates into the Strumbitsa mountains to clear out the barricades that Samuel had built. Despite destroying these barricades, Theophylact's detachment was annihilated by a Bulgar ambush while they returned from their mission. It is said that the son of Samuel, Gabriel Radomir, killed Theophylact Botaniates himself. The shock of this disaster and the death of the able Theophylact caused Basil to cut short his campaign and return to Roman territory. Basil received the surrender of Melnikios while on the way and rested in Mosinopolis. However, after he heard of the death of Samuel on the 24th of October, Basil attacked Pelagonia and burned the palace of Gabriel Radomir in Vuleti. He sent detachments that took Prilopon, Strypeion, and returned to Roman territory on the 9th of January 1015, ending what might be called the Kleidion campaign. The Battle of Kleidion remains quite a controversial battle among historians today. There are a range of opinions regarding the significance of the battle and skepticism about the number of Bulgars blinded. Mark Whittow takes the most revisionist view of the battle in his Making of Byzantium. He said, "Skylitzes' confusions preserve enough information to show that this account must be wrong. In the first place, Kleidion was not a decisive battle. It was part of a two-pronged Byzantine attack of which the other force under Theophylact Botaniates was heavily defeated. Skylitzes gives this a passing mention, but this significance is proved by the fact that rather than press on after his decisive victory, Basil could only retreat to the base he had started from. The blinding of the 15,000 is a fantasy. Had Basil committed this atrocity, he would effectively have disabled the Bulgar state. 15,000 men is a huge force for the early Middle Ages. Yet Skylitzes' own account shows that the war continued during 1015 and 1016 without any very significant Byzantine success. Far from dropping dead of shock, Samuel died as likely of old age as anything else, while his forces were continuing to resist very effectively. A more balanced view is reflected in Catherine Holm's biography of Basil II. See Basil II and the Governance of Empire. Thus, the figure of 15,000 Bulgarian troops blinded by Basil II in 1014 after the Battle of Kleidion is a statistic that some modern historians have treated skeptically, not least because the rest of Skylitzes' account of this campaign does not suggest that the Bulgarians suffered final defeat during this year. In fact, in the same section of his narrative, which deals with the Byzantine victory at Kleidion, Skylitzes also mentions a Bulgarian victory over the Byzantine general Theophylact Botaniates. Moreover, after Kleidion, Basil was forced to return to Byzantium rather than press on into Bulgarian-held territory. The fact that the war continued for another 4 years after Kleidion clearly indicates that Basil's Balkan adversaries retained considerable fighting capacity. In these circumstances, historians are probably correct to question the scale of this figure of casualties at Kleidion. In my own opinion, there must be a reason why this battle in particular was viewed by the Byzantines as what might be described as the great victory of Basil II during the Bulgar War. John Skylitzes, or the source he was abbreviating, felt it necessary to skip 10 years of conflict to start the epilogue of the war with the Battle of Kleidion Pass. They even placed it before the Battle of Thessalonika, which chronologically occurred first. Samuel had employed a new and potentially risky strategy to block Basil from attacking Bulgaria and threaten Thessalonika, the second most important Byzantine city in Europe. Not only did both of these strategies fail, but casualties and prisoners taken during the pursuits seem to have been very high. The number of prisoners that Basil had, although it may not have been 15,000, were enlarged because they included the prisoners taken by Theophylact Botaniates at Thessalonica. The subsequent elimination of the prisoners, in combination with these defeats, swung the war in Basil's favour and was further compounded by instability caused by the death of Samuel. Although the disaster at Strumbitsa and the death of Theophylact quashed the momentum that Basil had gained in 1014, it seems likely that Basil had not intended to knock out the Bulgars in the same campaign, and simply carried out his planned expedition. The resumption of the campaign after Samuel's death implies that Basil wanted to exploit Bulgar weakness and attack them again. After the battles of Kleidion and Thessalonica, the Bulgars always tried to defeat Basil's armies using ambushes, and not openly as they had in 1014. The double victory at Thessalonica and Kleidion Pass was not the battle that ended the Bulgarian Empire, but was the turning point in the war. It brought the war to a close in 4 years, which all other engagements had failed to accomplish in the previous 23. If you enjoyed this video about the Battle of Kleidion Pass, then please do like and subscribe to the channel. If you are interested in the late Roman Empire and late antiquity, then please do check out Professor Wren's new YouTube channel. He does podcasts covering various topics about the late antique world, including subjects such as explaining Nestorianism, who was St. Jerome, and also the barbarian invasions during the 4th and 5th century. I have left a link to his YouTube channel in the description below. Please do check it out. And this has been Eastern Roman History.